Hello everyone, it's Marlene from Pastime Pieces in Blenheim, Ontario, Canada. I am an owner of a quilting, cross stitch, and wool applique shop. So we do a lot of wool applique in our shop. And a question I get asked a lot is, how do I do a Buttermilk Basin ornament? There's kind of two types that she designs. One is, for this one, it's a background and then everything is fused on that one piece. So that makes it a little bit easier. But what do you do when they have extremities? So like the tree is kind of a separate shape outside here, tucked inside the back of the tree. I don't have a big background piece to fuse it all onto. And the only reason that becomes an issue is because when we're stitching around here and around our wheels and stuff, we don't want to see the stitching on the back of our ornament, because otherwise we could take this background piece, lay everything on, and then stitch it. It would be two layers, but we're going to see all our stitches on the back. So in her patterns, she's very vague about how to assemble it. And even myself, I had to call the shop to say, like, okay, like I've tried everything, like what do I do in order to layer these ornaments? So they did kind of quickly mention to me, and I, with practice in that, I finally figured it out. And whoever comes into my shop and buys a kit, I usually kind of talk it through, or if it's their first one, to pick one that's just fused all onto one background piece. This is the total of her pattern. So there's the shape that we're going to use. Now the pattern is in reverse, so that makes it a little easier. So this is the front of the pattern. So we're just going to, walk through how to do this one. So first of all, I use Heat and Bond Lite, and that's just my preference of what I like. There's Steam a Seam, there's Soft Fuse, and there's a few other different products. I tried Soft Fuse. I just find that my pieces don't stick long enough for them to hold for me to go and embroider them. So I've always had really good luck with Heat and Bond Lite. So what it is the fusible web. So it's paper on one side and gluey on the other side. So I'm going to take my pattern and I'm going to trace my pieces, but you have to look at your pattern to see what overlaps what, like what gets tucked underneath, because you don't want to have two wool pieces edge to edge, because it's too hard to embroider and without them kind of sticking out. So we take a look at our pattern and we figure out, okay, what overlaps what, and then we just draw a dotted line. Like a lot of patterns will give you that dotted line, and the dotted line means the actual edge, and then the other outside dark full line is what you actually cut, and that gets tucked up underneath. Unfortunately, again, her patterns are very vague, so she doesn't break it down that way. So when we take our pattern, first of all, we're going to draw the car. So we're going to draw the car and we're going to go straight across here. We're not going to go around. When we trace it onto our Heat and Bond, we're just going to go straight across. We're going to draw the windows because we're going to cut those out. And then we're going to trace the tree, but we're going to give the tree like down around here and up there, so that it's overlapped and that it's actually behind the car. Same thing with the wheels, the hubcaps, I don't know if that's what you call fenders, go on top of the red, and then the black wheel goes on top of that. So these are the pieces I traced onto my Heat and Bond, and you trace it onto the paper. So let me, my pencil, that's why I thought, why did I draw the tree on top of the car? But I have a very light pencil mark that's right here. When you're tracing your pieces onto the Heat and Bond, you want to leave enough that you can just cut around that first. You don't want to cut on the line right off. We want to leave a little bit of a margin. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that on this car since I got so close there. where I did have a margin, but you can't see it. Okay, so this is my car piece now. And see, I left a little bit of a margin. It's just rough. It's nothing, you know, trimmed or anything like that. It's just a rough piece. This is how my kit comes. It comes with all the pieces. So, well, it comes with buttons in there too. So be careful when you open your thing. Often I'll put them in a little separate bag. So this is the piece of wool that we're going to be using for the car. So now I'm going to take my car and I'm going to, with the iron, press this onto the back of the wool. Now there's no right or wrong side to wool. There is actually, but we're not going to get into all that because for this it doesn't really matter. They look very similar. If it's over dyed, you can pick which side you like best and make sure you do it on the reverse of the side that you like best. So we fuse this onto our red car. And when you're fusing, you gotta have some heat. And I use steam, so I'll hold it on there for at least 5 seconds with the highest setting that there is. And then, where's my car? Then you can kind of just see if it's stuck. Like I can't flick that piece of paper up. It's stuck on there well. So just make sure your piece is fused really well to that. And then we're just going to cut on the line now. Now, these are my absolute favorite scissors. Anybody who takes a class, if anybody has any of the class, they often encourage other people to purchase them because I have had them for years and they're very sharp. They have a serrated edge, so it helps with fraying, like for doing applique pieces. So for the wool, it gives a nice clean edge, but it also grabs your fabric. So when you're cutting out some of these small pieces, you don't have to hold onto your fabric so tight. The scissors kind of grab the piece as you're cutting. So yeah, these are Buckley scissors. This is the blue one. It comes in smaller and larger sizes, but the blue is kind of universal that way, and that it works out for a lot of different projects. So now I am just going to cut on the line. So just give me a minute to try this because I'm just going to show you how to cut out those windows as well. And this works for any applique, not just the ornaments. This is kind of the process you go through when you're preparing your pieces for wool applique. And this is just our way. I mean, there's some people that just like to base their wool pieces onto their background. Others use, you know, like a stapler. I like this because I still, even though it's wool applique and it's supposed to look a little rustic, I still like crisp edges around my piece. So now I've got those windows, so I'm going to cut those windows. So I'm just going to fold the window in half there, give it a little snip, and then just cut my windows. Then I can stick my scissor in and cut that shape. And I'm just going to cut it just as it's drawn. And I'm just going through this because it makes a difference later when I show you how to do the windows. And I'm going to try and tip my camera down when I actually go to assemble this, but it's easier for me and just if my face is there. Okay, so let me get the other window. The nice thing about purchasing kits for these is that a lot of you only need like little smidgens of fabric, wool sometimes. So this way you don't have to buy like a 5x5 square or you know, 8x13 piece to just have like a wheel. So, okay, so there is my car. I've already cut out my other pieces. Let me get rid of some of that there so I can actually find my other pieces. Okay. So now, how do I fuse my pieces onto something so I can have all those layers? Now, we're going to fuse it onto a piece of interfacing. This is FS 101. It's a woven interfacing. It's super nice. We use this all the time just because it doesn't melt, like this part doesn't, you know, get funny when you press it with the iron. Here's well, it's washable, all that kind of stuff. So it comes by the yard, and yeah, it's just a very good product. So it's called SF101, or Shape Flex is the name. So we are going to, since this already, so when I peel this paper off now, the gluey side stuck to the back of my wool, but now I have a gluey side here too. So it's really just a piece of glue and then paper on one side so that you can work with it. So now, since this side's already gluey, I'm going to put it on the right side of the SF101, and I'm going to build and layer on here. But what happens is that fusible gluey side is here, and if I do that on my ironing board, this piece is now going to be adhered to my ironing board, so can't have that. So most of you, if you know, do any kind of applique, then you have what we call an applique pressing sheet. So it's a piece of Teflon material. It comes, get rid of that. It comes like this, and this is a large sheet. I find I tend to use smaller pieces, so I just cut my piece in half, and then that way I've got, you know, it's a little more workable. So I'm going to lay this on my ironing board first. Now, I think it works if you put a piece of parchment paper down on your ironing board. You basically just don't want to ruin your iron or your ironing board cover. But yeah, so this is a Teflon, or if you have any kind of Teflon sheet, it'll work. Otherwise, you could try using parchment paper. So now I'm laying this down on my ironing board, and I'm laying the fusible side down on top of my applique pressing sheet. And now I'm going to layer my ornament. So let me see if I can tip my camera down far enough that you can see. Okay, I'm gonna back this up a bit. Okay, so there's my sheet. I've got my car on there. I have my other pieces cut out. So for the windows, you can see that this is the actual shape of the window, the solid pencil line. And then I drew another line around that to give myself a margin so that I can tuck it inside the window openings and not see the raw edge. So these are the two windows. I'm going to take the paper off. That's important because you can press to your heart's content, but it's not going to stick if the paper is still on there. So I'm just going to lift this up a little bit and just tuck my window underneath there and tuck my other window underneath here. So now I can't see the edges of my window. Hopefully you can kind of get an idea here. So that's the one step. So now I'm going to put my tree behind the car, behind the shape of the car. So I'm going to tuck this. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky because I already have my windows stuck behind there. So I'm going to try and lay it on top of the windows and still be inside that little margin of, or maybe it's, yeah, either way. I can always trim those windows later. So let me tuck that there. The tricky thing with this is I only have this much edge to kind of tuck all that stuff in there. So now there, I've got my extremity, my tree there. I've got my car, I've got my windows. So now This one's fairly easy. So this one, now we're going to put the fenders on. Now I got to find my... So then we're just going to kind of go with the pattern and just kind of, you know, eyeball it with the pattern of where the fenders need to go. It looks like it overlaps a bit on that side. And when we put our wheels on, we're going to adjust it. And then we'll put this little piece on this side, and we'll tuck our wheels underneath of that. Now, I usually press the whole thing all at once, but if you find that you're having issues with that, you can press just that top piece and leave this loose here. But yeah, we're going to tuck our windows underneath our fenders like that. So I did add a little bit of extra when I was tracing it so that it could be tucked under. And then we'll tuck that one under there and there. And then you just can kind of adjust it a little bit. And we could press it at this point, but we do have our 3 little snow pieces. 2 of the snow pieces aren't going to be tucked underneath. So it's only the middle piece where we've added a little bit of a margin to tuck it underneath too. So this part up here, let me see, this one's gonna go right there. So it just kind of gets tucked in there as well. There, I guess it goes like that. There. And then I could press this and then add the other 2 snow pieces because it's not overlapped. It's just gonna be on top. So that's the basics of layering it. So now we're going to go to the iron and we're going to fuse all this on, and we're going to make sure it's on. Make sure it's well pressed. Kind of go back, check your edges, make sure everything is down. And then after we fused it, let it cool for a bit, and then we'll cut our interfacing away. So now we're just going to go around very closely and cut exactly the outside shape of our ornament. Then when that's completed, we're going to stitch it. Now, when stitching wool, you don't have to. You can use whatever needle you want. Here, I'll bring you back up again. You can use whatever needle you want, but the chenille needles are handy in that they have a big eye. And often you're going to be using a couple strands of embroidery thread, or we use pearl cotton number 12, which is often a variegated pearl cotton. It just gives it a little more texture looking, a little more rustic looking. So we need to be able to get that thread through a needle. And it's fairly thick material, so you want not a really fine needle because you're going to be bending it. So, and chenille needles come in different sizes. A 24 is kind of the basic middle needle. I tend to use 26, but it depends how frustrated you get with threading your needle, I guess, because the 24 would have a bigger eye than the 26. So now we're going to stitch around our pieces. And most of them are just blanket stitch. These, I don't know if you can see, they're just blanket stitched around all the pieces. So again, this one's easier because I can just stitch through my background. And you do try and get a little bite, like make sure you're getting through your pieces, especially if they're overlapped. Make sure you're getting to that second layer of that you've overlapped onto, just so that it stays. Now for the ones that have the extremities, I often first stitch anything that's not over the edge. So like I'll go along here and I'll stitch here, and then often I'll leave my thread loose there. Whatever I've got left over, I stop there and leave it. And then I'll, and you don't include any of the outside marks. So then I'm going to go around this window here, and that's pretty well it, I think, for that. I mean, they did go a line here, a stem stitch for the truck door and that. Then after I've done all the inside stitching, then you're going to put the whole thing onto your background. So now the piece that's got the interfacing, the gluey side, is now going to be glued onto here. Now, sometimes the glue, because depending on whether you use the pressing sheet or not, sometimes some of the glue peels and stays back. That's okay. You can, spray fuse it or just pin it. But there's enough glue there to at least get it onto here and then press it. Again, you're going to cut all around the edges as neatly as you can, so that you don't see that black or whatever color your background piece is. Stitch all the way around. Then I go back and now you're gonna stitch around the edges. So that piece of thread I left here, I'm now just gonna go around here, around there, around here, and stitch the blanket stitch just on the outside edge. So you can see there. And then, yeah, the green, you're going to blanket stitch around the tree, you're going to blanket stitch around the vehicle, and then stitch around the wheels. And then now you have a nicely finished back and front of your ornament. I do wait to stitch all the buttons on at the end. So for the centers of the tires, the tree, little buttons that go on the tree, anything like that, I do stitch that on at the end. And I mean, you can see some little dots at the back there, but that's okay. Because for the most part, really, the ornament's going to be up against something. So it depends how fussy you are. But I thought at least this way I could walk you through of how to use the SF101, the interfacing to use. It'll be referred to in the pattern as your foundation piece. And then they suggested when I called that it's like a piece of interfacing, something thin. Now, this is white SF101. It does come in black as well, which I'll use more times too, depending on the color, because you don't really want that white interfacing to show once you stitch the two pieces together. So you kind of have to take your piece and look at it as you're blanket stitching around the final outside edge. If I find a little piece of interfacing is kind of showing before I trim it so that I've trimmed the interfacing smaller than the front piece and the back piece, because it doesn't really have a use anymore. It's put your pieces together so it's there. So you can trim away and cut some of that extra so it doesn't show on your edges. I hope this was helpful to you, and I hopefully can get it downloaded and put out there. But yeah, if you have any questions or emails, just let me know. But yeah, this is how to make a wool applique with extremities ornament. Okay, thanks. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.